Hello, everyone. My name is Deb Swanson. I will be the host for this session. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to Dr. Meena Clowes. Her presentation is a summary of her published article entitled Using Learning Analytics to Determine Predictors of Successful Completion for Online Students, which she has co-authored with Dr. Melanie and Dr. Scott Burrus. Welcome, Dr. Clowes.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Hi, everybody. I'm so thrilled to be able to share my talk with you guys. Just FYI, I do have access to the chat window, but I won't be checking it quite so frequently when I'm speaking. So if you have questions to type in, feel free to do that and I will get to it. Just might not be able to get to it immediately, but if you're like me, you may not remember your questions till the end. So feel free to put it in as you go. Okay, so Dr. Shaw and Dr. Burrus are both faculty at Ashford. So it's been my privilege to work with them and research with them. They are not here today. They're at a conference at the moment, a different conference at the moment. So I'm thrilled to be able to do their parts as well in presenting. Okay, what we really wanted to do with this study was, you know, there's a lot of, I think, institutional policy, especially when it comes to online institutions with non-traditional student base, where the institutional policy is really informed by certain assumptions. Like if our student base has these demographics and they look like this and they do this, then we should do certain policy. And some of that is literature-based, but I don't necessarily know that the most recent data backs up some of those preconceptions. So with that in mind, we thought, okay, how could we use big data here within learning analytics? How could we figure out for students, especially at-risk students in an online learning environment, what kinds of things can we learn about predicting their success? So are there predictors of student success when it comes to learning tasks? And are there, factors that could predict how quickly they would achieve success? In other words, how many attempts would be required? I think these two pain points, a lot of times when it comes to administration, are significant because there's a lot of institutional policy around how many attempts we should allow students and what drives whether they get those many attempts, and does it really matter? So we were hoping to address some of those questions and inform some policy. We know that data-driven decision-making is the preferred method, I think, now of institutional policy making. So certainly anything that can rest upon the data probably has a better shot at being implemented, I think. We know that attrition and retention are incredibly important, especially now with a booming economy, meaning slowing enrollment rates across the board. As we all know, when the economy is good, people don't go back to school to get jobs. And when the economy is bad, they go back to school. Can't get jobs. So we know that attrition and retention are huge factors in terms of institutional policy. And we also, I think, know that there's a role that persistence has in student retention. So if we can encourage students, if we can talk to what it is that causes them to be more persistent in pursuing their goals, then that has a direct impact on our ability to retain them and eventually get to their success. So these were some of the foundational ideas that we based this study on. So what did we do? The Center for Learning Analytics Research, which is where all three of us were fellows, actually, we were able to find a pretty large data set. It's actually 30,000 data points to begin with from the Open University in the United Kingdom. And if you're not familiar with the Open University system or idea, it's actually pretty similar to what we're doing now in higher ed, in the sense that non-traditional student demographics, so they're probably not 18, 19, 20-year-olds for the most part. It's mostly folks who are mid-career and or coming to earn a new credential. So open enrollment, so there aren't a whole lot of barriers to enrollment. So standardized testing and things like that are not typically considered. And a completely online education structure as opposed to some hybrid format. So this is important because the context now becomes similar, right? You're essentially controlling for barriers to entry, you're controlling for educational structure, and you're controlling for certain demographic factors, which could have a significant impact, quite apart from what we're studying on student success. So within that data set, in order to minimize any effects, we controlled for some stuff further. First, we wanted to make sure we used the same course module for all our analysis. So if the course module was offered across several terms, and there were several different course modules, we did not want to have to be concerned about how much of an impact the instructor had on this, or how much of an impact the time of year had on this, or how much of an impact variances in work requirements had on this. So we controlled for all that by limiting this to one particular type of course module and when in the year it started. The resulting data set, basically only used maybe 10% of the available data, but it's pretty solid data set, 3114. And after that, we did a series of hierarchical logistical regressions. Okay, so findings. First finding. So the first finding revolved around predictors of success. So what we did was we looked at some demographic variables, and we looked at the number of attempts as an independent variable and the successful completion task as a dependent variable. So what kinds of things actually predict success? Is it demographic stuff, or is it how many times they're trying to get this done? Turns out that demographic stuff is not nearly as important as previous number of attempts. So what does that mean? What does that tell us, right? It tells us that students who only required a single attempt are 1.5 times more likely to successfully complete the course than those who required more than one attempt. So this becomes really important now, because it's no longer about supporting students who are non-traditional differently than students who are traditional. This is more about supporting all students to try and get to a successful outcome their first time. So now you have entirely different kinds of coaching and soft skills that faculty would use in these courses, as opposed to if you were demographically focused, which is kind of where institutional policy has been leaning to a certain extent over the last couple of decades, at least over the last 15 years. So this was a fairly important finding, I think, because it suggests that success in the first attempt is really what has impact. So that's what you control for, that's what you look for, that's what you support. And the more you can do that, the more students you're likely to get over the finish line, and your own institutional outcomes are that much more successful. The second finding was around a whole bunch of demographic variables, and also looking at where they were in the program. So previous number of credits basically represented how far along they were in the program. So the thought process here was, okay, so now we know that the number of attempts is important. We know that. But is it just a matter of them getting used to the environment? Is it the fact that folks are coming back and the first few courses they're not very comfortable with what needs to get done, and as they get further along in the program they're more comfortable? Is that an important factor? And we know that is true to a certain extent. We know that the length of time they have in the program also affects your retention and attrition rate. Traditionally, the knowledge from the literature is that the first 3 courses tend to have a much higher impact on attrition than courses that follow. In other words, if they make it past the first 3 courses, chances are pretty good that their retention rate's going to increase significantly. So we knew this was an important variable, we just didn't know how important. So it turns out, for those who only required 1 attempt to be successful, the number of previously studied credits was the only significant predictor. So once again, right, if they only needed 1 attempt to be successful, what was really predictor there is how far along they were in the program. So this reinforces the previous findings that how far along they're in the program matters. But it actually kind of downplays the effect of age, which has been a significant predictor, or treated as a significant predictor, and gender, because it suggests that those are not actually important predictors when it comes to getting students successful in one attempt. But here's a secondary finding. For those who required more than one attempt, age was also a significant predictor. So it mattered not only where they were in the process or the program, but it also mattered how old they were. So it becomes like a compound finding here, right? So in other words, the number of credits students had, prior to taking this is a useful predictor of whether or not they're successful the first time they try. But for students who need numerous attempts before being successful, this basically means that older students requiring multiple attempts might be as much as 14 times more likely not to successfully complete the course. So a significant difference in getting them through that very first attempt. And we know, right, if we get them through the very first attempt, we know that they're much more likely to complete everything that follows. So recommendations. Since the number of attempts is more statistically significant predictor of student completion than student demographics, if we figure out how many attempts students need in order to be successful, then that's far more useful, right? Because understanding what influences them in order to be successful the very first time is far more important from the kind of support that you want to be able to provide those students, whether it's faculty skills and who you put into those courses in terms of teaching them, or it's actual institutional policies. Not a lot of universities right now even track number of previous attempts as part of their learning analytics measures, which is interesting. One of the things that I think, one of the recommendations that we would make coming out of this is that you really do want to try to track the number of previous attempts. So not just, hey, we're going to average out your grade in this course if you take it more than once or whatever. Those are usually what the policy usually is. They don't actually track how many times somebody attempts a particular course, a particular either a task or a course as part of the overarching universal learning analytics measures that that institutional research departments might track. So this would probably be a very useful thing to track because it can, in fact, help you trend over time in terms of what's affecting student success. One of the things that I think that came out of this is that we didn't have enough granularity with respect to age. So the way these data were collected, age was categorized fairly broadly. And I think that we realized pretty quickly that for the people who need more than one attempt, the older they are, the more influential it is. But is there a cutoff point? For example, is there a difference between those who are 50 to 65 as opposed to 65 and older? Or is there a different cutoff point? And we didn't have enough granularity of data to be able to do that. Of course, the data were de-identified, so you can't go back and de-aggregate the data because they, for ethical reasons, obviously, they were published de-identified. So I think that there is room here for some additional research in terms of how exactly age plays into this. I think it is a more detailed relationship than what we have seen here, and I would certainly like to see where that goes. Where's the detail? Where does it take us? So in conclusion, here's the key contributions. We know that that how far along people are in a program is important. We know of everything else. The single most important thing is to get them through the first time. If you don't get them through the first time, you start immediately their chances of succeeding start dropping immediately. And we know that for students who need those multiple attempts, age has a significant role. So we need to, far more than gender, by the way, or ethnicity or any of the other roles, other variables as well. So that is our summary of our study. So here's my contact information, and I will be happy to take questions at this point. So does anyone have any questions at all, or I'm going to assume no questions? Well, if no questions, then we can go ahead and close out. Oh, we have a question. Okay, let's see. Data is interesting. If the feature is active, however, which feature is that? Use that information to provide assistance. I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with Civitas. I don't know what that is. Are you, Felicia, I'm sorry, I'm not 100% sure. Are you referring to a system that is within Ashford? Is that what that is? I don't teach at Ashford, so I'm not
Hello,
familiar.
Meena.
Hi.
Yes, I
Okay.
apologize about that. This is Felicia. Yes, Civitas is a feature that we have in which we engage with our students. And if they have repeated the course once before, we know that. And I believe that having that information helps us to better assist our students so that the data that you shared with us would be greatly used for that purpose. I do have one question regarding the data showing or indicating that it makes a difference, the age. What is the age? Do you have any data on the
Yeah.
age that it
Yeah.
makes a difference? Okay.
Yeah, we know that it makes a difference if they're older than 50. We know if
Okay.
they're older than 50, 50, it makes a difference in terms of, but here's where I urge a little bit of caution, because I don't know if it matters if they're 50. I don't know if it matters equivalently if they're 51 as opposed to 71. Do you know what I mean? That's where the
I do.
granularity is missing. Yeah, yeah. So 51, it may not matter as much. 71, it may matter more. I'd hate to draw any conclusions based on that, but 50 was the category, and that's the part where I think we could use more granularity. It's great that you guys track if somebody takes a course, but I hope in addition to that, you also track how many times they've done something, not just once or twice. But I don't know if your system does that, but hopefully it's part of the data collection. That's useful. You know how many times, not just if it's once. You know.
Right. I think that's a factor. In addition to that being a factor with those that are older than 50, the other factor that I'm thinking about is the use of the technology. Wondering if it could be a comparison of information regarding those that take the courses online versus those that take it in class. I
So,
think that might be
yeah.
another factor there.
Sure, yeah. We had confined ourselves to pretty much just the online students, but you're right. I
Right.
mean, there's bound to be huge differences. And frankly, it's a challenge to control for those differences because one of the things we know we know that the impact of the facilitator or instructor is less pronounced in online courses than in-person courses, which kind of makes sense, right? So it becomes that
Right.
harder to control for the instructor variances. Yeah. But you're absolutely right. That would be an interesting study if I can just figure out how to operationalize the control factors.
But that your data is so, and as you were presenting, I was like really into it, and I was just like, it's really interesting how the age factor did come into play. I do understand how it would, but then also not repeating the course again too, and that just may have to deal with insecurities possibly too as well. But thank you
Yeah.
so much for sharing your data. I greatly appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, this was a fun study to do because I hear all the time from institutional policy how important demographics is. And it's kind of nice to have something solid to say, well, yeah, but it's not nearly as important as supporting people from getting successful the first time. Will you do further studies looking at age as a predictor? You know, I want to. The data are hard to come by, Loretta. These data were kind of a gift because finding it was a challenge. So collecting data, what that means is that I have to actually be able to tap into the learning management system, learning analytics data in various places to draw that. And universities are, surprise, surprise, shockingly reluctant to give that up. So I would like to design a more granular study with age as a predictor. I don't know that undergrad versus grad matters as much as we might think. I think I think whether folks are digital natives or not might, in the sense that even those of us dinosaurs, in which I count myself, have become more comfortable with digital technology as we go. But I'm nowhere close to being like my teenage nephews who are just they live in the data world. They're digital natives. I suspect that matters, but I don't know if undergrad versus grad matters or not. I would love to if I can but the data are hard to come by. They're very challenging, and I don't blame universities for not releasing that data or not being willing to release. But some of them don't even track that level of cohesion, right? Because I have to be able to get to the student, their demographics, and then their completion. And when you put those three things together, it becomes personally identifiable. And so universities are legitimately worried about that. Sure. Yeah, my pleasure. Any other questions? No? So in that case, Deb, I'm happy to close out the session if you are. Thank you so much. Really appreciate the opportunity to share.
Thank you very much for your wonderful presentation, Dr. Clowes. And for those in attendance, please join us for another TLC session in 15 minutes. Thank you.